The dynamics within a married couple's relationship are profoundly private, yet sometimes it's truly beyond imagination to grasp the bizarre and tragic turns that can unfold between two people once deeply in love. Today, I'm here to dive into one such perplexing case, that of Matthew and Mary Winkler, a story that culminated in a fatal shooting. Matthew Winkler was born in November 1974, the youngest child in his family. His older brother's name was Daniel. The Winklers resided in Huntington, Tennessee, a small town in the United States with a population of less than 5,000. Their family had a deep-rooted history of church service. Matthew's grandfather was a third-generation Christian minister, serving as the director of the local preacher's school and authoring several books on biblical theology. Matthew's father also followed in his footsteps, becoming a pastor. Consequently, the Winkler family held a respected and prominent position in their community due to their devout religiosity. Matthew's father, Dan, had begun his ministry 5 years before Matthew's birth. While still in high school, he started building a small church, completing its construction during his college years. After graduating from his university program, he became a full-fledged pastor and later met his future wife, Diana. They married in 1970, and their sons were born shortly after. The family frequently moved, often crossing state lines, as Dan's preaching duties required. These constant relocations forged a resilient character within the entire family. Eventually, the Winklers settled in Austin, Texas, allowing Matthew to finally experience a stable high school education. He was an athletic young man, passionate about football, and spent nearly every day at the gym. Matthew was active, energetic, and possessed a creative mind, which led him to participate in church puppet shows. He was generally perceived as a pleasant, kind person and quickly became popular among his classmates. Although he didn't achieve the academic distinction of his older brother, he earned significant respect within the community. After high school, his parents encouraged Matthew to join the church ministry, where he took his initial steps toward becoming a pastor. Matthew enrolled at Freed-Hardeman University in Henderson, Tennessee. This was a contemporary institution that embraced innovative perspectives on traditional doctrines, making it appealing to the younger generation. On the surface, the Winkler family seemed idyllic and happy. However, behind closed doors, Matthew's father, Dan, maintained a rather strict hierarchy and rigid rules within their home. At the time, this stern upbringing might have seemed a reasonable approach for raising two boys. In 1993, the family relocated again, this time to the larger city of Nashville, Tennessee, where Dan served as a preacher for 11 years. Just a couple of months later, Matthew met a modest yet charming student named Mary Carol Freeman at his university. She was a year his senior, and an immediate spark ignited between them. Their relationship quickly blossomed, moving at a rapid pace. Just 3 months later, Mary informed her parents that she would be bringing her boyfriend home for an introduction. The meeting was a success. Young Matthew made a favorable impression on Mary's religious family, and her parents gave their blessing to the relationship. Within 6 months, Matthew proposed, Mary accepted, and on April 20th, 1994, the couple exchanged vows. Matthew's beloved, Mary Freeman, was born in 1973, the first child of her parents. At the time, they lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. Her family was also deeply religious, regularly attending the Church of Christ, where her father served as a pastor. Her father's word was law in the Freeman household. Later, a second daughter, Patricia, was born, facing severe health challenges: cerebral palsy, spinal meningitis, encephalitis, and intellectual disabilities. Her parents never gave up, investing immense effort into her care. Patricia even learned to read, though she clearly didn't comprehend the meaning of the words. Despite her challenges, the sisters were incredibly close. Mary, the elder sister, would even sleep with Patricia to ease her fears. Mary herself was generally calm, reserved, and accustomed to obedience, even somewhat meek. During Mary's elementary school years, her parents decided to perform a good deed and welcomed a foster child into their home, a little girl named Shannon. Shannon was part of a large sibling group. Her four other siblings were placed with different foster parents. However, they were all eventually returned to their biological parents. Mary's first profound trauma occurred on April 15, 1987, when her younger sister, Patricia, suffered a heart attack while bathing. Patricia tragically passed away at the age of 11. The death of her beloved younger sister was such a devastating blow to Mary that, at 13, she was compelled to seek help from a school psychologist to cope with her grief. However, her father discovered this and was enraged. He personally contacted the school, demanding that the staff specialist cease interfering in his family's affairs. In his opinion, he and his wife were the ones who should address such matters. In reality, Mary received no genuine emotional support from her parents. Consequently, this trauma evolved into post-traumatic stress disorder and a host of other psychological issues that Mary would struggle with throughout her life. Meanwhile, problems resurfaced with Shannon's biological parents. Child Protective Services once again removed the children from the home, this time permanently. The Freeman family was able to fully adopt 11-year-old Shannon and her four siblings. Finally, their dream was fulfilled and they became a large family. Their biological daughter, Mary, now the eldest, embraced her new role, helping her mother and guiding and supporting the younger children. It was after this that she met Matthew, and their whirlwind romance began. It was her first love, consuming them completely. They started dating, skipped classes to spend time together, and eventually dropped out of school altogether when they discovered Mary was pregnant. They married and moved together to Knoxville, where they crammed into a small apartment near Mary's parents. Matthew, now the head of a young family, found work in construction. During this period, he became profoundly exhausted by the heavy physical labor, to which he was unaccustomed, and also by the difficulties of married life that the couple began to encounter. Matthew increasingly lashed out at his wife, though she genuinely didn't understand the problem. He likely blamed her for having to drop out of school, start working, and finding himself in such a difficult position. While his peers enjoyed their freedom, Matthew was forced to work tirelessly to support his family. Matthew decided to quit his tiresome construction job and began searching for new work in his hometown. However, new problems soon emerged. Mary's mother was diagnosed with cancer, and Mary herself was pregnant with her second child. Despite family support and treatment at a specialized clinic, Mary's mother succumbed to her illness and passed away in April 1999. This was a devastating blow to the entire extended family. Mary's father struggled to cope with 5 children on his own. After this, Mary's adopted siblings began turning to her for help far more frequently. She assisted them as much as she could, but couldn't dedicate all her time, as she was pregnant herself and occupied with caring for her own child. In June 1999, the young Winkler family was searching for a comfortable home. With limited financial means, they purchased a modest, unfinished house in the tiny town of Pegram, which had a population of only 2,000. It was located about 15 kilometers from the church where Matthew had secured a job as a pastor. The young family moved into their new home just before the birth of their second daughter. Mary soon experienced postpartum depression, and a heavy burden weighed on her during this period. In addition to her own children, she was essentially playing a motherly role for her adopted siblings. They proved to be very demanding and capricious, which irritated not only Mary, but also her husband, Matthew. He was authoritarian, demanding that his conditions be met, and his wife supported him. Mary later severed ties with her biological relatives, presumably due to their constant pressure and her husband's demands. Overall, acquaintances described Mary as modest, shy, home-oriented, and even a little odd. She had rather weak social skills, rarely interacted with others, and was quite withdrawn. At the same time, the young mother was prone to sudden mood swings, which could provoke her husband's displeasure. During this period, Matthew was advancing in his career, which added to the emotional tension. One could say both spouses were on edge. Mary later confessed that her husband developed a desire for sexual experimentation. She found this difficult to reconcile with her very conservative views on intimacy. She severely restricted her husband in the bedroom, leading to his dissatisfaction and periodic outbursts of anger. Mary began to complain of sexual abuse from her husband, but Matthew didn't believe he was demanding anything perverse. In his view, it was his wife's inhibited nature that constrained him. One day, a similar conflict led Mary to call her two brothers to stay overnight. She felt Matthew was aggressive and feared being alone with him. The two brothers spent an entire night with the young Winkler family. During this time, Matthew decided they needed to move further away from his wife's family to minimize their interference. Once they moved from Pegram, the Winklers' married life finally seemed to stabilize. Mary described this period as quite difficult and was glad that she and her husband had managed to overcome it and preserve their relationship. The couple bought a house in the neighboring small town of McMinnville. By this point, Mary was pregnant again and delighted at the prospect of having a large family, much like her own had become. However, Mary later suffered a miscarriage. In their new town, they found kind and caring neighbors who provided significant support with household chores, sometimes acting like grandparents to the Winkler children. Matthew's pastoral career continued to flourish, though it required frequent travel, keeping him away from home for extended periods. He was expecting a promotion to lead the local church. His wife found a part-time job, working reduced hours to contribute to the family's financial well-being. Many indeed viewed this religious couple as role models. During this time, Matthew also worked part-time, teaching Bible classes at Boyd Christian School. He was highly regarded as a professional, considered a good, positive person who could inspire parishioners to adhere to religious values. He earned the respect of the entire community. However, those who worked closely with him observed a certain arrogance and tension that Matthew, the teacher, generated whenever he entered his office. His wife brought him lunch at work every day, yet despite her thoughtfulness, he treated her disrespectfully. His secretary was so incensed by this behavior that she felt compelled to rebuke Matthew for what she considered unforgivable conduct for someone preaching Christian values. Yet, no one had any reason to believe that the man behaved far worse at home. Behind closed doors, he allegedly used physical force against his wife. This continued until one day, Mary appeared with a black eye, which immediately raised suspicions among the local residents. She explained it away as an accident, but never disclosed the true cause of the bruise. Rumors began to circulate that Matthew might have harmed his wife, potentially even during perverse sexual acts. The entire town was aware of his alleged inclinations. It's hard to say if this played a role in Matthew's career setback, but in 2004, he lost his position as church pastor. Another preacher with a more respectable reputation was found to fill his vacancy, which enraged Matthew as he was once again left searching for work. The Winkler family relocated to another town to start fresh. There, he found employment at a local church. Around this time, they learned Mary was pregnant with another girl and eagerly awaited her birth. But even here, things weren't smooth. Almost immediately after moving, several conflicts arose with neighbors over a dog living next door. Matthew feared the dog might bite his children and threatened to shoot it, while the neighbors resisted. At the new church, however, no one had heard or witnessed the provocative behavior Matthew was known for at his previous job. Everyone regarded him as a polite, caring, and loving husband, the head of a wonderful family. For a time, he managed to maintain this reputation. Brett and Glenn, close friends of the family who socialized frequently with the Winklers during this period, confirmed this. One day, the friends gathered to celebrate the couple's anniversary. Glenn and Brett revealed they had purchased a pistol for self-defense. Mary shared that her husband had taken her to a shooting range and she knew how to handle a weapon. They also already had a pistol at home, so the couple agreed that such means of protection were a good idea. But later, unexplainable events began to unfold in the Winkler household. During this period, Mary, after childbirth, enrolled in a teaching program at the university, intending to earn a degree and find a job. Her dream was to care for sick children. On December 1st, 2005, Mary received a check, purportedly a lottery winning. She borrowed money to pay an insurance premium, and while awaiting the lottery payout, she took out a similar amount from the bank. This all turned out to be a scam, leaving her in a precarious financial situation. She opened an account and deposited a large sum of money, but the check was fraudulent. Mary had engaged in a financial maneuver, hoping to gain $6,500. However, it proved to be too naive an idea to succeed, and her scheme was uncovered. Truthfully, Mary was still unaware of this at the time. By February 2006, she realized the financial transaction had been rejected. Sometime later, Mary visited the bank and changed the mailing address on her account, using a rented post office box. This confirmed her attempt to execute another financial maneuver. She opened a bank account, providing only a mobile phone number and the P.O. box address as contact information. She arrived at the financial institution with $100 in her account. She then attempted to withdraw $7,000 from it to cover her previous debt. After this, she redirected her address to ensure all communications would go to the rented P.O. box. During this same period, Matthew received congratulations from his father regarding their improved financial standing. He had no idea about the financial chaos his wife was orchestrating. They had nearly paid off their debts thanks to Matthew receiving compensation from an accident a few months prior. It was astounding. While the head of the family worked to improve their finances, his wife was engaged in illicit financial schemes. Apparently, she was desperately trying to rectify their situation, but only exacerbated it. The very next day, Mary was contacted by the bank administration. They informed her that her transaction was illegal, that there were no funds, and therefore, the requested sums could not be provided. They urgently requested she come to the branch with her husband to speak with a manager to resolve the difficulties. Instead of discussing it with Matthew, she remained silent. A bank employee offered her a $5,000 loan, which would cover the difference and allow them to put the whole matter behind them. However, the account was joint with her husband, so Mary couldn't make such decisions without his consent. Thus, she left empty-handed. Later, bank employees contacted Mary again, informing her she needed to resolve the problem immediately or a criminal case for fraud would be opened against her. They still offered the loan to cover the fake check debt. She promised to think about it. While Mary deliberated on how to extricate herself from this predicament, a terrible tragedy occurred. On March 22, 2006, the Winklers were scheduled to attend a church service with their congregation. Their 3 daughters were also meant to be there and stay with other children. However, at the appointed time, no one from the family arrived. This seemed suspicious, as the pastor's religious family never missed such important events. After waiting a little longer, an elder called the family's home, but no one answered. This was also uncharacteristic for church members, especially since Matthew was scheduled to deliver an important sermon that day. Consequently, everyone present immediately sensed that something was wrong. One of the church elders went to Matthew and Mary's home to check on them. Inside, the lights were on and the television was loudly playing, but there was no response to calls or knocks at the door. The man peered through the windows, but couldn't see anything. He called for help from neighbors and other church colleagues. After an extended search, spare keys were found in the house's utility shed. Around 9 p.m., the Winkler's home was opened. When the church elders entered, they discovered a horrifying scene. Matthew's body lay on the bedroom floor in a pool of blood. It was evident the man had been there all day, as the pastor was in his pajamas, and his body was already cold. Dried, Bloody red foam was crusted around his mouth and nose, smeared across his face. Matthew was 31 years old at the time of his death. Following this grim discovery, the church elders called 911. Police and paramedics were dispatched to the scene. Medics pronounced Matthew dead, while police simultaneously cleared the crime scene of onlookers who had already contaminated it. Forensic specialists began working to find clues, but the contaminated crime scene posed significant challenges. What was particularly strange was that Matthew's wife, Mary, and the children were not in the Winkler home, nor was the family car, and no one could locate them. Everyone was worried for her and the children, as the intentions and motive of the perpetrators who killed their beloved pastor were unclear. Both Winklers had unique personalities, but they generally got along well with people and certainly didn't deserve such a brutal end. Police issued an Amber Alert, believing that the other family members might have been abducted and were in danger. At that moment, no one could even imagine what had truly happened inside the house. According to the autopsy report, Matthew had sustained a single, fatal gunshot wound to the chest. He lived for a few minutes before bleeding to death. During the investigation, detectives uncovered Mary's financial schemes, and her reputation was seen as questionable. Subsequently, her status shifted. She was no longer just a potential victim, but could now be considered a perpetrator, at least due to the forged checks. She, her children, and the family car were placed on a wanted list. Law enforcement officers managed to track her mobile phone that same day. She was located in the coastal city of Orange Beach, Alabama, approximately 600 kilometers from the crime scene. Local police were notified and attempted to apprehend her. On March 23rd, patrol officers spotted the Winkler's minivan making an illegal U-turn. Around 7:30 p.m., 3 police cars surrounded Mary's vehicle in a grocery store parking lot. Police acted cautiously, as there was a possibility that Mary and the children had been abducted and could be harmed. However, the driver was Mary herself, who was promptly apprehended. She calmly listened to her rights with a blank expression and proceeded with her children to the police station. In the back seat of her car, police found a 12-gauge shotgun, the very weapon used to shoot Matthew. Mary's 3 daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Mary Alice, and 1-year-old Brianna, were extremely frightened. The older children were interviewed, and both girls told the same story. An intruder broke into their home, and their mother took a weapon to defend them. Unfortunately, it was too late, as the assailant had already shot their father. They then had to flee from the killer, but the girls were convinced their father was alive and in the hospital. Mary provided contact information for her relatives, to whom the children could be entrusted during her arrest. Over 2 days of fleeing, Mary and her children traveled a significant distance. She had treated them to a true holiday, with swimming pools and entertainment. It seemed as if she was trying to spend every remaining moment with them before the police caught up. However, this only worsened her predicament. Her situation was indeed dire. In addition to criminal prosecution for fraud, she faced a lengthy explanation as to why her husband lay dead on the bedroom floor and what had truly transpired in their home. The very next day after her arrest, Mary provided a confession. She stated that the previous night, they had a small conflict with her husband, after which they went to sleep in separate rooms. Afterward, she found the weapon in her hands, one he kept in the closet for self-defense. According to her, she didn't remember exactly how it happened. It was like a memory blackout. The next moment, she heard a noise and then saw her husband fall from the bed, gasping with bloody foam. Mary emphasized that it all felt like a haze. She couldn't recall how she took the weapon or fired it, nor could she explain why she did it. Despite her hazy recollection, the prosecution had grounds to charge her with first-degree murder. Her father mortgaged his home, and 5 months after her arrest, Mary was released on a $750,000 bond. She returned to Tennessee and took a job at a dry cleaner while awaiting trial. The prosecutor insisted that Mary had intentionally and meticulously prepared for the murder. She had disconnected her husband's mobile phone to prevent him from calling for help, ensuring he would bleed to death. She knew where the weapon was stored in the house and seized it without impediment. It was clear and proven that the shotgun was the murder weapon. Only the motive remained unclear. No one could understand what had happened to the quiet, meek Mary and why she killed her husband. All local residents considered the pastor a saint. The children confirmed that Matthew was a good father and had never touched them or their mother with ill intent. They had never heard arguments between their parents. That day, the children awoke to a loud noise and came out to see what was happening. From around the corner of the hallway, the girls saw their father on the floor, but their mother, upon seeing them, closed the door right in front of them. The girls didn't have time to fully grasp what had exactly happened in the house. According to the prosecution, Mary had financial problems that she was desperately trying to hide from her husband. However, this would have been impossible, as he would have discovered her schemes during the next check of receipts and accounts. In all likelihood, he uncovered the deception, and this led to his shooting, or she decided to kill him so her husband wouldn't learn of her schemes. The investigation revealed that this check fraud was far from Mary's only illegal operation. She had sent forged documents to 5 different banks, orchestrating schemes totaling $17,500. This type of fraud is known as check kiting. Check kiting is a type of fraud where a person artificially inflates the floating balance in a bank account to use non-existent funds. Witnesses were found who had heard Mary's phone conversations with bank employees, who urgently requested her to come in and speak with managers, along with her husband, to resolve the issue of insufficient funds. Notably, no bank had reported her to the police and instead attempted to resolve the problem amicably. However, Mary ignored all of these attempts, precisely because she was trying to conceal her failure from her husband. In court, Mary recanted her confession to her husband's murder, attributing it to a state of shock. Her lawyers developed a version of events where the financial schemes were not Mary's doing, but rather her husband's. They portrayed Matthew as a domestic tyrant who physically assaulted her, sexually abused her, and forced her into these financial deceptions. The final argument revolved around the murder weapon itself. According to the defense, cocking the shotgun would have been too loud and would have woken Matthew, who was asleep. This implied it must have been loaded earlier, long before the crime, but Mary was unaware of it. She simply picked up the gun, not realizing it was in a live state, intending only to intimidate the tyrant. But the unthinkable happened when she accidentally fired and her husband died. Therefore, the defense argued the shot was accidental. However, this poorly explained why a loving wife would point a weapon at her sleeping husband, even if she didn't intend to shoot, but merely to threaten him, as he could have disarmed her and shot her in self-defense. This version sounded highly dubious to the prosecutor. In court, Mary recounted all the horrors she endured living under the same roof with an aggressor. The defendant labeled her husband a domestic tyrant, accusing him of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse. Mary presented a wig and high-heeled shoes that she claimed her husband forced her to wear. These shoes were even displayed in court, and the defendant broke down in tears upon seeing them again. Mary believed her husband deliberately humiliated her, beyond the provocative appearance he forced upon her. She claimed he made her watch adult films and coerced her into certain intimate acts unfamiliar to her. His tyranny manifested in everything, down to the smallest details. She even needed his permission to get a haircut. Despite this, the defendant meticulously covered for him out of shame and fear. According to her testimony, he subjected the entire family to total control and severely punished them for the slightest transgressions. Mary even suspected him of molesting their shared children. Thus, over years of marriage, a profound well of negativity accumulated towards him. According to the defendant, on that fateful morning, their youngest daughter's cries woke them at 6 o'clock. 1-year-old Brianna was crying in her room, and Matthew grew enraged, literally dragging Mary out of bed to go calm their daughter. She dutifully went to the nursery, but the baby wouldn't settle, further enraging her husband. He burst into their youngest daughter's room, grabbed the baby, and began covering her mouth and nose to silence her. Mary became terrified that their daughter might suffocate and begged her husband to give her Brianna back. Eventually, he handed the child to her and returned to the bedroom. Mary calmed her daughter and put her back to sleep, then took the shotgun and went towards her husband, where she accidentally shot him. But, according to Mary, she didn't even immediately realize what had happened. She saw her husband fall from the bed and hit his head. The defendant was afraid that he had accidentally fallen and would now be angry, so she fled the bedroom. Mary began listening, wondering if he was pursuing her. Once she was sure everything was quiet, she returned to the bedroom to check on her husband and only then realized she had shot Matthew. In a panic, she gathered the children and fled the house. This was Mary's explanation for why she could have truly lost control when taking the weapon, and why she had memory lapses. In another fit of rage, the man attacked his children and wife, and then immediately went to sleep. Under the influence of this, Mary, having lost control, accidentally shot him. The prosecutor, however, adhered to a different version of events and considered her story absurd. It even fundamentally differed from the initial account Mary gave during interrogation. The prosecutor did not rule out that Matthew could have been an authoritarian and aggressive man who controlled the entire family. But the killer in the Winkler family was not him, but Mary. In his opinion, the wife killed her husband so he wouldn't discover her secret about the financial fraud. The decision in this controversial and convoluted case rested with the jury. They had to review numerous documents and testimonies related to the case, as well as various sentencing options for Mary Winkler. The lightest penalty implied only 1 year of imprisonment, while the harshest was life imprisonment without parole. In this scenario, she also faced permanent loss of her parental rights. On April 19, 2007, after lengthy deliberations, the jury reached a verdict, finding Mary guilty of voluntary manslaughter. This was a middle ground between the most severe and the lightest penalties. The deliberations lasted approximately 8 hours. The case awaited the judge's final word. It was expected that the defendant would be sentenced to at least 6 years in prison. However, the judge's decision proved even more astonishing. Mary Winkler was sentenced to only 210 days in jail. Accounting for the 5 months she had already served before the trial, Mary was then placed in a psychiatric facility for 60 days, after which she was released. The judge and jury explained such a lenient sentence by stating they believed the defendant and took into account that she was a victim of domestic violence, driven to despair. Most local residents also believed her, with the demonstration of the shoes Mary spoke about particularly influencing them. The women of the small town agreed that wearing such footwear was simply humiliating and supported the killer. The prosecution considered this verdict unjust. They were convinced that this was a case of premeditated murder, as Mary took the weapon and made the decision to enter the bedroom. No one was chasing her, and she was not under any threat at that moment. Upon entering the bedroom, she aimed the weapon at her husband and fired, meaning it could not be called involuntary manslaughter. However, these arguments were not taken seriously, and their numerous appeals for a retrial were rejected by the court. This egregious case was widely regarded by many as a benchmark of judicial error and sparked widespread public outrage. The victim's family, in particular, was furious, deeming the sentence a mockery of justice. In August 2008, the widow was granted full custody of her 3 daughters, who at that time were living with Matthew's parents. A fierce battle for child custody ensued. The deceased relatives argued that Mary was an unfit mother who had killed her husband, making her an unworthy example for the children. They also claimed Mary had anger management issues and, in the face of any problem, might resort to violence again. Nevertheless, their arguments were unsuccessful and Mary was granted custody. She was never charged in the fraud case, purportedly because her deceased husband was the one orchestrating the schemes and forcing her to commit them. For some time, Mary worked at a dry cleaner, then transitioned to a job at a kindergarten near McMinnville. However, neither of these jobs was permanent, as she was constantly pursued by negative public and media attention. Mary, now 50 years old, leads a reclusive life, and her current whereabouts are not disclosed. If you found my work compelling, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel, support this video with a like and a comment, and check out these other videos I recommend. Thank you all and goodbye for now.